What I'm going to be talking about today is my 2-week adventure in Russia, Mother Russia, which was a very interesting time. I was able to attend this interesting trip through Fulbright Scholar Grant Program. It's the title of it is Community College Administrator Seminar. And there were 5 of us that attended from several schools. I departed the United States on April Fool's Day. And the joke was on me. You'll see the picture in a second why there was a joke on me for that. It was very interesting. All funded by the Department of State. They even give you a stipend. Instead of submitting receipts and things like that, they give you money up front and say you're supposed to use this to pay for everything, including lost luggage, which I hope to get to here in a second. So this was it, 2 weeks in Russia. Everything you're going to see in here, I took the pictures, so none of this is off of Wikipedia. I have to stay in the, and this is just a short itinerary. You can see it was very busy, very busy. I left on the 1st for Russia, lost my luggage, left from Cleveland, went to Newark, went from Newark, Munich to Moscow. My original trip was going through Brussels, and guess what happened in Brussels right before I left? And the airline said, don't worry about it, your flight will go through. It didn't. So the day before I left, I had to change all my flights, thus I lost my luggage. So when you look at Russia, about 5 to 6 hours time difference when you're calling, depending what time of year. Okay. The delegates, there was someone from Pima Community College, San Francisco, Solana, Davidson Community College in North Carolina, moi, and then Evergreen Valley College from also near Silicon Valley. So there were 5 of us, all administrators. For the other schools, these people were responsible for their international programs. Okay. These are some of the, I got to show this up front before the nice stuff, the pictures. These are some of the schools we visited. It was a very demanding trip. Government got its money's worth out of us. We're always going on the road, on the road, on the road. And the whole intent of this trip was to link up administrators from various institutions to maybe do some partnering in the future, maybe do some Fulbright exchanges, maybe they could get a Russian instructor over here, vice versa for students and faculty to go there. So the major 3 cities were Perm, Tyumen, and Moscow. Of course, I thought we'd go to St. Petersburg and spend most time in Moscow. We didn't. Again, very busy, very busy. So, a little geography. If you look at Europe, of course, Mother Russia's here to the east. That's a fraction of the size of Russia. Russia itself is 11 time zones, I think, right now. 11 time zones, if you could imagine. It used to be 13. Or it's 11 and it's 9 now. Whatever. Putin changed the time zones. It's 9?
10.
10? No. 10. Just remember, don't you sharpshoot me. So, you're looking at massive Russia. It's an incredible country, okay? Incredible country. The mass of the population lives west of the Urals in European Russia, which I showed you earlier. That's where most of the population is. That's not to say that there aren't large population centers in Siberia. Talk more about this. And if you have questions or comments, please ask me. So we started in Moscow, the great city of Moscow. We landed there, spent one night in a wonderful hotel, and then we got on an Aeroflot airplane to go to Perm, Russia, an industrial city. Used to be a military industrial complex city. It was known for making rocket engines and jet aircraft engines during the Cold War. Big technological center. It's one of the so-called off-limits area. About 2 million population. I would compare it to Cleveland in many ways. Just an industrial city. Something like Cleveland in the 80s, okay, still recovering. Interesting little history with Perm is the former mayor of Perm lives in Vienna with his wife after taking, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars in fleeing. Putin has his men after him. Therefore, the city never really got all the oil wealth that other cities did because of the corruption. So that's Perm, and I have some pictures of that. After Perm, we went to Tyumen. Okay, now Tyumen. Here's Yekaterinburg. Here's the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Yekaterinburg, if you know, is where the Tsar's family was executed in 1917-18. That was my favorite city, Tyumen, in Siberia. Okay, Ural Mountains, again, right here. So now I'm in Siberia, and I was very pleasantly surprised by what I found. We spent a night in Tobolsk, interesting city along the Irtysh River, a major river in Russia, and then we eventually returned back to Moscow for the end of the trip. So distance, to give you a relative distance, about 1,000-mile flight from Moscow to Tyumen. So Moscow to Tyumen, 1,000 miles. How far is it to San Francisco? Yeah, 3,000. So it doesn't look a lot on the map, but it is a great distance. It's about a 3-hour flight on good old Aeroflot. And Aeroflot's fine. They fly Airbuses and Boeings, a couple of Lucians, things like that. Yes, I met Putin. That's as close as I got to him. Yeah, he's checking me out. I was wearing the same coat. That's why I wore this today. But very highly revered in Russia. Most government buildings, which includes the schools, have him in the conference room. Anyhow, he's done very well by them. Okay, that's a happy American when his luggage arrives after a couple days on the road. I landed in Moscow. My luggage didn't, and I thought, oh my God, here we go. I'm never going to get it. And Moscow is a very expensive city. Okay, anything is $60 or more for. There's no Walmart. There's nothing to get anything quick. Their underwear is different than our underwear. But I was able to buy it, and they actually got my luggage to me in 2 days. I was very surprised and very impressed by what they were doing. When you think of Russia, you really have to do a mind dump on everything you see on TV. That's the biggest problem. I think that's the biggest pleasant surprise most people. I've always tended to be a Russophile, which means, I don't look too critically on Russia. I left there a big fan of Russia. It's an incredible place. And I found the people to be very much like us, okay? Very hospitable, cities are clean, orderly. Of course, with the Russian police and the FSB, probably that helps. But anyhow, so I'm going to show you some street scenes. These are street scenes from Perm. Public transportation is everywhere. I mean, not that many cars other than rush hours in the morning or evening. But people are always using the public transportation, whether it's buses, trolleys, the subway. I didn't have time to upload the slides of the Metropole in Russia, in Moscow. But very efficient, very well run, and very, very, very cheap. Okay, when I was there, the ruble was 66 rubles to the dollar. I could get a real nice, good sit-down meal for about $5 to $8. Not in Moscow, but in the outer areas. And everything's a la carte there, You have to order your meat, you got to order your potatoes, you got to order your salad, everything's a la carte. And the borscht. Borscht was phenomenal. But every city has different types of borscht. Okay. Here's another city from another picture, Perm. In many ways, it's very modern. This building was a big mall, office buildings, a lot of commerce. Cars are interesting. You'll see Chevys, Fords, a lot of Mercedes, a lot of Beamers. There was a lot of wealth there. Okay. And you don't hang around any of Mercedes with tinted windows and when they're in groups of 3 or 4. It's sort of, if you've ever been to DC and all of a sudden you hear the sirens coming and you see a lot of that especially in Moscow. Saw some of that in Tyumen. I told you Perm itself, very much an industrial city. This is a lot of green spaces. European cities have a lot of green spaces, a lot of parks, easy access through the public transportation. This is a scene down in, well, not a scene, but a picture in Perm. And they were celebrating the 1,000-year anniversary of Perm. And this is Cyrillic P. And there's I have one better here. That's fellow American. And built out of over, I think it's 1,000 spruce logs, all bolted together. And from any direction, you see the Cyrillic P. And Perm. Perm gave name to the geologic strata Permian, the Permian time period. So it's very, very important area as far as geologists are concerned, okay? And that's where the phrase comes from, Permian. Sort of cold, but like Cleveland. The weather here, matter of fact, was nicer over in Russia, and you were all getting slammed by that snowstorm last year. You know, you look at Russia, and everyone thinks of the Soviet Union, and everyone, you know, misnames everything about Russia and has these weird ideas. But nonetheless, history looms large in Russia and the former Soviet Union. Does anyone know, other than Mike back there, who Felix Dzerzhinsky was?
Chief of Secret Police under Lenin.
Yeah.
Cheka, they called it back then.
Right. He was the founder of today's FSB, but KGB, so on and so forth. And there's a statue to him. I was sort of surprised. Statue to him in Perm, because that's where he was born. In Perm. Okay, but I guess we would have a statue to our CIA. It's all perspective. Another street scene, very busy, very active, people on the streets. Russian cities are very, very lively, okay? Restaurants everywhere, very reasonably priced. Transportation, very reasonably priced. I thought this was funny because of the Chevrolet car in front of me there. Can everyone see these? Or is that sun back there hurting? Okay, so in Perm, we spent a day going to schools and looking at various things. I'll have more slides later. But this is evening, you know, this is right out of the movies, huh? Getting ready to board the Trans-Siberian Railroad in Perm. The train station wasn't that nice. And we got on the Trans-Siberian Railroad probably about 9 o'clock at night, and we made it to Tyumen the next morning through copious, no, just joking. This was my roommate, fat American, and our beds on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It was very, very tight, but very nice. A hallway down to the bathroom, and then every car has a lady or gentleman that sits there the whole trip, brings you tea. Tea's very big in Russia, or anything else you want. I recommend you never buy anything on the railroad because it's about 20 times as much as in a store. Nonetheless, we had a good time, and they were very gracious and courteous. I was exhausted because I had to load everyone's luggage. The one young lady from Valley State, California, she'd call herself the Valley Girl. She had 4 suitcases for 2 weeks. Yeah. And she said, "Oh, I'm a Valley Girl." And they're like, "No, you know what?" Tyumen. This is the Opera House in Tyumen. Okay, a lot of the architecture still exists from the Tsarist period. Matter of fact, Russia under Putin has put a lot of money and effort into resurrecting a lot of the symbology and landmarks of the Tsarist era because it's part of the Russian identity. Okay, the Russian identity. When you think about how the Soviet Union used to be, everything was suppressed for the Communist Party and the notion of a greater Soviet Union. So they're doing a lot of great things there to resurrect the old buildings. And then you're going to see a lot of buildings I'm going to show you here, the interesting architecture. He's not going to let me walk out of his field of vision. Russia is the second to the U.S. In the use of timber and buildings. America's number 1. Russia's number 2. And why? Well, Russia's got plenty of timber. But the United States and Russia use more timber than anyone else in construction. And you'll see here one of the really important aspects of their construction are the window frames. Each building is unique. And I'll show you some of the villages, too, as I traveled through. This is, I believe it's the Tyumen River in Tyumen. You see the building up there that I just showed you earlier. Monasteries, churches everywhere, all being restored, property being returned to the church from the government. This was, about April 5th, so there is still some ice. And again, green, a lot of esplanades along the rivers, a lot of green space. In the summer, this would be full of people walking with their children, and a lot of kiosks to sell food. Another church, this is in Tumen. We're visiting this school here. Now their colleges, they have a 2-year college system just like us. And some are more technical than others. Some are more in the line of culinary, domestic type arrangements. But very organized, and you'd be surprised how similar they are to us. Students can go to a 2-year college and take general education courses, then matriculate to a 4-year university. One thing they have going for them, though, is everything's under the federal government. So it's very similar across, right? Courses transfer between their states, their versions of the republics, and so on and so forth. So very interesting how they do it. Here's another old building, but it's a German-Russian partnership, like a guild. Tumen's an important city because it's on the Trans-Siberian Railroad on the east side of the Urals, and it's the gateway point of where most of the oil lines and natural gas lines flow west. So guess what Tumen has a lot of? I thought it was richer than Moscow. A lot of money. Tumen has a lot of money. And the Siberians are interesting too, because they think of themselves like Texans think of themselves here in the US. They're American, but by God, we're Texan first. Siberians are the same way. They're very proud of being Siberian. So the Germans are in there quite a bit. Matter of fact, when I went to the town of Tobolsk, north of here for one day, weren't many English speakers, but they spoke German because of all the German engineers for the petroleum industry up there, which really helped me out a lot. The desired second language in Russia is English. In Moscow and the major cities, if it's not in Cyrillic Russian, it's in English. And most of the young people do have a pretty good command of English. Some of the old architecture, a restaurant. Again, this was our tour guide in his Cossack pants and his black boots, very entertaining. We went around the town, walking everywhere, looking at the old districts. Like I said, a lot of renovations. Here we went to visit their national treasure, this old guy right here, who maintains the crafts and arts of woodworking to build these old village houses and centers. And his house is a museum. We walked all through it. It was very interesting. And some of the architecture. What was really a novelty to me was how much effort was put into downspouts. Now the houses you're looking at are from the Tsarist era and mostly businessmen's houses. Trade was big in Tumen because it was a gateway through the Urals to the west. Again, the gates, very ornate. Downspouts, I couldn't get over downspouts. A lot of wood carvings, a sign of wealth and opulence. They're very hard to renovate, very difficult, because each house is so unique in many ways. You look here and you think it's brick, but it's actually wood, trimmed and painted to look like brick. So it's very impressive. It's the same house with I like the downspouts, okay? The veranda. Here's a nobleman's house, also in Tumen. I think now it's a government, I think it's a German company's headquarters in Tumen. Right below this building is the river. It's a very pricey part of town. Okay. But again, this all goes back to the Tsarist era. Okay, when you go to the technical colleges, it was very amazing to me how similar they were to us. And here it just shows in Tumen, their technical school, students working in construction and electrical industry. These are workstations. A lot of these are bought from Germany. And the students learn their various skills, whether with electric motors and all sorts of gauges, dials. This was the construction for homeowners construction program, just to give you a flavor for it. Students start at the walk, crawl, walk, run, basic carpentry, then leading up into more advanced construction. Very organized, very organized. Each school has its own uniform, which I found interesting. Every school has its own uniform. Part of the academic year, at the end of the year, they stage this large student day where they have skits and they make fun of the professors and the deans. So a lot of camaraderie there, okay? Here's the machinist, the beginning of the machinist program. And it was a pleasantly pleasantly surprising. I thought I could be in the U.S. at any of our community colleges. There you go, there's one of the colleges, transport, technology. They also had a construction program in there too. They have the same equipment we do, simulators for students that are operating heavy equipment. So they sit basically in a backhoe or dozer and they're playing on a game. So they're putting a lot of money into education. He's a leftover from the communist times. Now, think the Russians drink a lot? Well, that's what an average American would think. This is the first time I was ever offered any alcohol at a gathering. I had people telling me, oh, you got to watch it. They're going to drink like crazy. Okay. Tell me something I haven't read somewhere, right? That was the first time, and we had a big lunch with everyone gathered, and he was passing the vodka bottle around. The Fulbright people stopped him. This is Andy Rice from Washington, D.C. He was basically our chaperone, if you will. Interesting guy. Served 3 years in the Army, was in Berlin, decoding Soviet messages. So he speaks Russian fluently. So we had a very good time. And he was the dean of the college. Good guy. Great meals, but you don't. If you want to see Russia, you don't go there for the food, right? I would say it's better than Britain, but that's not one thing that really stood out to me. Here are welding booths, but I couldn't take any pictures because they're welding. So they have a very similar to what we do, very new. Very big into, these are some of the items the students welded and put together. They're very big into world skills competition. We call it Skills USA in the United States, where all the students across the country compete in various technical skills, whether it's welding or carpentry or whatever skill. The schools, they're big on world skills, and all their technical schools have to meet the requirements of that. So they have a very robust curriculum and good program. They also have culinary arts. This is in Tumen. Metro here, the sign in the background. While it's not Walmart, one could say it's as ubiquitous as Walmart. Every town has Metro stores. And the stores are very, very well ingrained with the community college. We spent half a day with their Chamber of Commerce in Tumen, and they actually help to drive the curriculum at the schools, as long as it falls within the framework of the federal government mandates. So, for example, PERM was well known as, I think I already told you, rocket engines, jet engines. So they have a lot of say in the curriculum for the machinists. And the students get jobs out of here, especially if they work within some of the programs supported by the major industries. So there's a kitchen. Again, here's their uniforms. They prepared our meal for us. What they also had, what was interesting, that I don't know we do in the U.S., but every state's different in the U.S., where they take young men and women that have, now you can't really tell here, but have disabilities, okay? For example, like alcohol fetal syndrome, you have a lot of young adults that are a little bit behind their peers, and so they also have programs for them to work in certain industries. This was also that culinary school, but these will be the young men and women that work in restaurants, serving, behind the scenes, not necessarily chefs or anything like that. So pretty robust social services program. I was impressed by this. Now, getting back to alcohol, I didn't experience any heavy drinking. I didn't see anyone sitting around on a street corner, any winos or anything like that you could see on YouTube, when they always, you go to YouTube and see all this crazy stuff. I didn't see it. The federal government has a huge program to discourage drinking because of its detrimental effects for society, which have been significant over the decades. And I saw, they have billboards advertising, don't drink, things like that. Think of your family, think of your country. So, Russia has a lot of timber, and these are birches. And in Tumen, we went to visit a plywood factory, and we got to watch the whole process of plywood being built for IKEA. Almost half of the plywood in IKEA products comes through this factory, I'm told. And it's incredible to watch how they do this. Very modern, high technology, big employer in the city. Average salary about $1,000 a month. That's what they make, about $1,000 a month. Anywhere from $600 to, and very busy there. This is how we got around when we were doing our excursions. Mercedes bus was okay. It's one of the road stops. You can see the showers are over here, douche. Back in here, there was a bear caged up. I didn't show a picture of it because the animal people in here would go, oh, they're so mean to the bear. But a lot of interesting sights to see and look at. So we went on a lot of excursions when we were in these cities. You know, the so-called mandatory fun. And, you know, again, I'll show some more churches, Baroque style during late Tsarist period. A lot of silver. Those domes are out of silver. A lot of money. It's a monastery. This cathedral and monastery overlooks the Tumen River. Again, driving around, and this you'll see through some pictures is the windshield that was broken. But anyhow, I wanted to capture some pictures of just housing in the area. And this you see everywhere in the smaller towns and cities. Again, all wood. Post office. Church, slowly. They always start with the domes, and then they slowly go back to the nave and repair on the way out. Typical village. Okay, typical village. Of course, it's dreary because it was snowing and cold, but you know, village along the highway we were traveling. You know, I just was wondering about the Germans there in World War II. Ubiquitous, everywhere. Forests of birch, absolutely gorgeous. I guess a good way to think about it is if you've seen Dr. Zhivago. That's pretty good cinematography that captures the vastness of the region. Another village, you see some of the interesting roofing, mostly lumber. A newer one, this is a new wooden house. I thought was funny because those are the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And then the woodworking on the sides. You see a lot of this in the towns and villages. Most of them have satellite dishes, they have electricity. I had more internet access in Russia than sometimes in the US. Cold and austere, again. And again, just to give you appreciation for Russia. We were traveling to a very famous monastery on this day on an excursion. And you could see it right here. That's about from 4 kilometers away. It was built to commemorate, well, it's Bolgorovsky Monastery. And it's still being repaired and refinished because it was damaged by an earthquake. But it was built by the Tsars late, I think it was finished in 1916, something like that. So it's sort of late. Huge complex. This picture doesn't even give you the appreciation of the vastness of this monastery. And it's desolate in the middle of the woods. It was built there on purpose. For Orthodox traditions, for monasteries to be secluded from humans and to try to train and learn and worship in a very spiritual world. You know, that's a day visit to go visit there, to see everything in there. That's the river, I think it's the Irtysh River, still frozen. Tobolsk, the city of Tobolsk is on this bluff. This is the Kremlin. Kremlin means fortress. So when people say, oh, the Kremlin, well, Kremlin's just fortress in Russian, okay? It's the only masonry fortress east of the Urals. It was built in the 1600s. When you look at the US and how we moved west, the Russians did the same thing, except they moved east. And this is one of the fortresses that they built over there, the only one. Everything else was made out of wood, stockades, very similar to what we have. And then there's a very famous monastery in here. You can't tell now, but right behind this whole complex, it drops down to that river, and you can see the city of Tobolsk. It's a tourist spot, not only for foreigners like me, this is where I had to use German, but for Russians. A lot of Russians travel up there to visit. It's gorgeous. Nice little restaurants. Here's your standard housing, socialist era housing. Okay. No. Really, there's not much you can do to it except for your patios and other things outside the house. Another view, again, birches everywhere. But they have a lot of new construction. Now, this isn't Moscow. This is Tumen. Okay. A lot of new construction, a lot of new apartment buildings. It's slowed down a bit because of the price of oil. has gone down significantly. But the economy is I don't know, this is Lenta. This is another one of their large supermarket chains. Matter of fact, in Tumen, the technical college that we visited, all their managers for the Tumen region in Lenta are trained in that technical college. So there's really a close tie between the technical schools and industry. Okay. More birches. Okay, now we're coming to pretty soon the end. Yeah, that's good. Good. This is world famous Red Square. Okay. The lions, of course, are for the parades. Kremlin walls, fortress walls, St. Basil's, and GUM department store to the left. Okay. Always day and night, people. Everything's lit up. It's absolutely gorgeous. This is right off of Red Square. Small church. There's a famous gate down here that allegedly every time the Tsar left the Red Square, he would stop at this little church to pray before he left. It's the Tsar's Gate, or Nicholas Gate, I think it's called. Am I right, Mike? I know more than you, huh? This is their tomb of the unknown soldier, Russian. Really, though, it's centered on World War II. Okay, they have the eternal flame, Russian helmet, some banners, and then the guards that are there 24 hours a day. That's the wall of the Kremlin. Okay, and when you go to the right, they have a lot of monuments to the various campaigns and battles of World War II. World War II looms large in the Russian consciousness. It's nothing like here in the U.S. Every day it looms large. They haven't forgotten. There aren't any families there that didn't lose someone during the war. And some of the old gals are still left around from World War II. We met a couple at the aviation technical school. They came in to visit us, and one lady was talking how they used to fly aircraft right from the factories into battles to fight the Germans. But anyhow, it's very somber here. It's just like the U.S. Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. You better not goof off here, because what you don't see are the police around there. I was quite touched by it. It's one of the many posters celebrating the 70-year anniversary. Not celebrating, but in remembrance. For example, if you young people get married in, say, Tumen, they have their marriage ceremony and everything that, and the tradition is afterwards put a bouquet of red carnations at the town's monument to the World War II dead. So it's really part of their society. They don't ever forget. Probably has some impact too, the communist legacy, but really World War II looms large in their lives still. St. Basil's, incredible. I mean, Russia should be on your bucket list, but Russia's huge. So I have never been to St. Petersburg, but Moscow's worth the visit. That's the department store at night. St. Basil's here, GUM department store. Inside, this place is, you have to be rich to really go into GUM department store. I mean, every boutique you can imagine is in there. It might as well be in Paris, London, New York. And what's that? Can you read it right here? It's Lenin's tomb. It's very easy to get in and see. They don't have long lines anymore. And they have hours open. It used to be 24 hours. When I was there, they were renovating some things. And I heard off the cuff that there's talk about moving it out to somewhere on the outskirts of Moscow. But I don't think that's going to happen. Back here where dignitaries are buried, premiers, so on and so forth. So Lenin's tomb. That's the GUM department store again. Again, architecture from pre-end of World War I. A lot of it's still standing. It's amazing when you think of how Russia was devastated, Soviet Union was devastated in World War II, how it's come back. Who knows what that is? Bolshoi. That's the Bolshoi Theater. You can't get a good ticket for less than $250. So a lot of my colleagues were there. Said, we want to go to Bolshoi. I said, okay, it's about $230, $260 a seat. So no matinee prices there. And they play about 7 days a week. So very, very impressive. Again, another picture of that. It's to remind me where we're going. And also as a juxtaposition. Russian Orthodox, the largest mosque in Moscow. I think it's the largest mosque in Russia. Okay, it was just completed. Okay, you know, Russia has a very large Muslim population. Depending where you're at, and it's based on what people too. I mean, it's not monolithic. This is one of their old. This was the State Pedagogical University, so the Teachers College, in an old imperial building, and they're having a book fair. I'm like, damn, this is just like in the U.S. For children's books, for educators. And then the wings off this building were all the classrooms and libraries, so on and so forth. They have technology there in their colleges. They have their rooms like we do here, the labs, computer labs. They really utilize the old space they have, okay? Unless it's engineering or military industrial, you'd be hard pressed to find a Holden University Center type building, okay? But they make great use of these buildings. The square again, I think I'm coming to the end almost. Ah! McDonald's. Yeah, there's McDonald's. This was in Moscow. There's this long boulevard. It's about 2 kilometers long, pedestrian zone. Mike, what's the name of it? Arbat, the Arbat. And you could take the metro there, and I went there with that old Andy Rice. He and I, for about 3 hours, walked all the way down and all the way back. And it has all the kitsch, but it also has a lot of nice stores and restaurants also. This was at the end, McDonald's. Who knows what that is? Krispy Kreme. I was looking for Americana. Burger King. Now these are all from different cities in Russia. There's another McDonald's. Now, you know, you think of our McDonald's, we have drive-throughs. I didn't see any drive-throughs, but they do have. When you go up there, you don't order from a person. You go up to this machine, you pick what you want, you stick in your credit card, you pay, you take your ticket, and you go to the front of the, you know, to the. It was funny though, because the manager of this restaurant, this McDonald's, was in the U.S. for about 6 months. It's a corporation learning how to manage, and they rotate employees to the U.S. for some experience. You can see in the back the fairgrounds. The center of the town has this large park with Ferris wheels and rides for little kids. You always see families out there. You know, the Russian cities are very much alive. Okay, Andy. Starbucks. Now, Starbucks is expensive there. Now it's time for your questions. I have a whole bunch of other photos, but I figured this would go on forever if I got too much on there. And we were treated quite well. Let's see, what are some of the questions I get? Did you see? Yes, we had FSB guys following us around once in a while. Sure.
When you talk about people, was it a lot of closed in? You know, like our cities are, you know, housed, you know, real close together.
Yeah, and not like suburbs. Is that what you're getting at? How the settlement patterns are? Very much close together. There's no real. If it's suburbia, it's out where the dachas are, where the very rich are, huge houses and complexes. But they don't have the sprawl that we would see here in the U.S. There's a lot of, it's amazing, the open areas between major metropolitan regions. A lot of the villages and stuff would be clustered around like common areas where the cattle and stuff, where they work with their forage and where they gather all their agricultural products. The interesting thing is Russia's developing its own beef industry because of the sanctions. If you're not aware, Russia's been under sanctions because of Ukraine for several years. They've gone through what a lot of countries are going through, but they're really on quick speed import substitution. So instead of knuckling under to the sanctions. Okay, well, we'll develop our own industry. So they actually flew over Texas ranchers to share insights on raising beef cattle. They have cattle, but cattle's mostly for dairy, okay? Things like that. They eat a lot of pork. Beef tongue's very popular, and I'm like, nah. So now they're growing their beef cattle industry. It's very interesting. Yeah, they have farms.
With so much of the construction being in wood, do they have a problem with fires?
Just the same we do.
Really?
I mean, if you go to our suburbs, they're basically all wood. But, well, yeah, everything's wood construction pretty much in the U.S. Moscow's not as much wood now. They had a lot of wood construction. Napoleon changed their minds on that. When they burned that city down, a lot was replaced with concrete and brick and mortar. But when you go to the outlying areas, wood is still a very, very much used construction material. No, I wouldn't say wood's really alarming fire issue there.
Do students pay to go to community colleges?
No,
and universities?
they don't really pay. Some schools you have to pay, but most of it's free. Mm-hmm.
Female students? I mean, the pictures showed males, and I don't know if it's just particularly what you're looking at, but.
No, I visited a cosmetology school, some in the engineering, but not many. Most of the engineering and industrial crafts, primarily men, but in the aviation technical school, I would say it was probably a third female from what I saw. Because they were doing a lot of very high fidelity and precision work, and women are much better than men at that. So I saw them there, but I wouldn't say it was misogynistic. I mean, when you think of the old Soviet Union, women do most of what men do over there. So I didn't see an issue with that. That I saw, right? If I was in Moscow the whole time, I might have a more different or nuanced view. But since we got to travel all over, I got a good feeling from where I was at. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do they have women in the Army?
Yeah, they have females in the Army. Not like us or the West. Okay, they don't have female infantry. We're getting to that point, or in the tanks or in the combat arms, but they have a lot of women. They have women pilots, things like that. Sure do. Yes?
What about their imports? Do they have a lot of imports like we do? Clothing and
Well,
stuff?
you will see Chinese merchants, stuff from China. When you go on Red Square, and you notice if you saw Red Square, the pictures I took, gone are the Yeltsin days where there were kiosks all over the place. The hotel I stayed in, the Metropole, it's a very grand, very expensive hotel right next to Red Square where all dignitaries stay. There used to be 2 strip clubs in there. I think Putin's second term, he got rid of all that stuff. It was sort of like Times Square back in the 70s. Got rid of all that. If you're not paying your taxes, you couldn't have kiosks. So the only kiosks you saw out there were ones that were approved by the government that were paying taxes. So they're trying to get out of the black market economy and really start, because if you're not paying taxes, you look at Greece. Imports, you see a lot of Korean and Chinese automobiles, but the VW's second largest plant is outside of Moscow. And even though there's sanctions on Russia, the Germans are still heavily investing there. So they build a lot of VWs in Russia.
What's the general feeling of Putin there, about Putin there?
Well, he's a strong leader. I mean, according to polls, he has like 80% popularity.
What
And
are
I,
those controlled polls, or are they
everything I got was very positive because he brought back the rule of law of order, and he went after the oligarchs.
did he really?
Oh yeah, well yeah, corruption and oligarchs. Go to Great Britain. You don't know how many Russian billionaires you can find around London that fled. Sure did. Or the mayor from Perm that's living in Vienna. I don't know how long he'll be alive. Supposedly they got guys out after him to get the money back, hundreds of millions of dollars. But he's, allegedly he's very corrupt too. But rule of law and order, The state controls the means to violence, so criminality is way low. Outside of the Caucasus, they don't have a large problem with terrorism. But every school I went to, I don't know what we have in the U.S., but we have boards too about keep your eyes open, about being prepared for any kind of emergency, things like that. Well, he was very popular because of, in 1989 when the wall came down and Russia became, and the Soviet Union dissolved, then Russia was open to outside investment. The Russians will tell you that they were taken advantage of, and they were. And he brought back a semblance of national pride. He brought back wealth. The Russians have been able to get through these sanctions in large part because when Putin started his first presidential time, he created what was called the Stabilization Fund. And I don't know how many hundreds of or billions were actually in it, because he knew one day oil prices would probably change and it would dramatically impact the economy. They've been able to survive with keeping their social services going and things like that through that stabilization fund. Because when a barrel of oil was $110, $120 a barrel, you had a lot of millionaires in Russia. But now it hovers between 30 and 50. So they suffered through that. But the ruble, I was there with 66 rubles to the dollar. I think today it's around 68. It was, I track it now because I was there. It was as low as 62 since I've been back. So the ruble still has its value. It's not what it was for American exchange a couple of years ago. But they've been able to survive.
You notice a large military presence?
No, that was surprising to me. See a couple soldiers or officers while walking around. Didn't see that many police either. No, I was surprised about that. Now we did have a problem because I told you that city Perm was a military industrial and off-limits city. I think there were like 12 or 20 in the Soviet Union that foreigners couldn't visit. That was one of them. And they had problems with me because I was on the trip that they didn't want us to go to Perm, but then they said, no, it doesn't matter. That's where they build a Sukhoi. There are 27 and MiG-29s out there. Yeah.
What about the healthcare system? What's that like?
Didn't have to use it. Never got Montezuma's revenge.
Did you hear anything about it?
No, I didn't hear any real complaints. Now, you do have boutique industries. You have private doctors, so on and so forth. It's probably not the health care of the Soviet days, which was real good. I mean, Russia, Soviet Union was well known for its health care. I mean, LASIK eye surgery was developed in the Soviet Union. So they have pretty smart people there. That's not what they have a shortage of, I'll tell you that, smart people. They always ask us, why are Americans so mean to us? Why don't they like us? And only once was where we put on the spot. But yeah, they want to understand why. Because every one of those schools would love to establish partnerships with U.S. partner institutions and integrate.
Was that the goal of the trip?
Yeah, yes.
What types of career paths do a lot of the women go through?
Well, the teachers, the pedagogical institution was mostly women, actually, I would say. The business school was big. That store Metro I was talking about, how they hire, a lot of the managers come out of female ranks at those schools. Any more questions? Anything? I enjoyed it. I would say I probably drank less there than I do here in the U.S. No, it was great. It was a great time. I recommend anyone here that I don't think you would say that guy was nuts. If you ever go to Russia, Moscow is well worth it. It's an incredible city. They suffer from traffic issues just like Paris or Rome, but in general, it's an incredible city. And I think you would find. I walked away thinking, damn, these could be Americans. Very similar in attitude and demeanor. Now they do think if you smile all the time, you're an idiot. But the people themselves, one-on-one, are very nice. I enjoyed it. Early part of my military career, they were the enemy. But don't make no mistake about it, they're an adversary, right? Great powers have adversaries, and Russia is an adversary of the U.S., but I would think they'd be a partner. And I was waiting for the Trump question, but I didn't get it, so. Thanks. Thank you very much for